Okay, I'm hoping that we can see me because I'm on Zoom right now. Um, but hi, my name is Samuel Hankey, and this is my racial justice project. Um, the topic I chose was school inequality for for minority students in the United States. I picked this topic specifically because I'm a student and I would like to be a teacher one day. Um, and this seemed mm, to be the topic that I was most interested in learning more about, and as well as for my interview, I got to interview a close friend of mine. Her name's Angelica, and she's Black and she's a teacher, and she's married to my best friend. So it was interesting because I got to get some insight from her and her experience. So let's get right into it. So first, we got to talk about and define exactly what school inequality is. So when I say school inequality, all that means is any inequity in school funding between predominantly white schools and schools that serve Black or Brown students, as well as anything like unequal access to advanced classes, such as AP programs, or disparities in access to technology or resources, or some of the statistics. And I have resources for all these, but some of the statistics in terms of like disciplinary disparities, where Black students are punished more severely for similar behavior compared to white students or anything like that. So just anything where there's inequality between students of like minority students and white students. Um, there's a lot to get into on this slide, but just a brief overview of the history of educational inequality. Um, well, for one, slavery and educational denial, which was how our country was founded until this Civil War happened. Um, we enslaved Black Americans, and they were legally prohibited from learning to read or write, and education was seen as a threat to maintaining the system of slavery. During Reconstruction, there were the freedmen's schools. So after the Civil War, the Freedmen's Bureau established schools for Black children, but they faced lots of resistance from white communities, which led to underfunding and attacks on these schools. Um, the Jim Crow laws in the 1870s, Plessy v. Ferguson, they kind of came up with this idea that, 1890s, that legalized separate but equal facilities, including schools. Unfortunately, they were not equal. Black schools were still underfunded. They were overcrowded and lacked resources compared to white schools. In 1954, there was the court ruling Brown v. Board of Education, which declared school segregation to be unconstitutional. And many states resisted this ruling. They resisted interrogation through shutting down public schools, sending police or sending military and police to public schools, and funding private white academies. In between the 50s and the 70s, lots of white families moved to the suburbs, creating predominantly white and affluent schools, while urban schools serving Black students remained underfunded and overcrowded. Um, and then starting in the 1970s, still to this day, lots of public school funding tied to local property taxes created disparities. So wealthy areas got well-funded schools, and low-income areas, which unfortunately is often communities of color, got poorly funded schools. Um, Zero tolerance policies in the school to prison pipeline. So this is an issue that we face today. Is um, there's lots of harsh disciplinary policies that disproportionately affect Black students. So the over policing of schools in Black and Brown communities lead to systemic inequities. So, luckily, with our culture today, there is a push for funding reform, um, creating culturally responsive teaching and anti racist policies. And there's organizations like the Black Lives Matter movement at school that fight for equal opportunities and resources. One of my resources for school inequality was The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. And this book primarily discusses and deals with the mass incarceration problem and its relationship to systemic racism. So she also connects and makes an interesting point about the school to prison pipeline, which is educational inequality, showing how schools often perpetuate anti-Black systems through their harsh discipline and the lack of resources. One of the quotes here, they've got a couple, is students of color are routinely targeted by teachers and administrators for discipline, pushing them out of schools and into the criminal justice system. It becomes a direct pipeline that starts in the classroom. Racial bias in public schools create conditions where Black children, instead of being educated and nurtured, are systemically labeled as problems. And school discipline disparities like suspensions or expulsions contribute to unequal outcomes for Black students. So I have some statistics here that reflect the disproportionate discipline for students of color. Black students are 3.5 times more likely to be suspended than their white peers for similar infractions. It's from the U.S. Department of Education Office for Civil Rights, done in 2021. Black girls face a suspension rate 4 times higher than white girls. That's from National Women's Law Center 2018. And schools with police presence, Black students make up 31% of all arrests, despite only being 15% of the student population. Education Week 2022. And schools serving predominantly Black and Latino students are more likely to have police officers than counselors or mental health professionals. That's from the ACLU, done in 2019. Some more statistics. Suspended or expelled students are 3 times more likely to have contact with the juvenile justice system. 70% of students arrested or referred to law enforcement in school are Black or Latino. And studies show that teachers are 40% more likely to label Black students as troublemakers compared to white students who show the same behaviors. A second resource I have is Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria? This was another book by Beverly Daniel Tatum. And in the book, Tatum kind of explores the identity development among Black students and discusses how racism impacts education. The unequal treatment and lack of representation can affect Black students' self-esteem, academic performance, and a sense of belonging that carries with them for the rest of their life. So if we live in a society where whiteness is the standard for normalcy, what impact does that have on children who are not white? Racial identity is shaped not just by internal experiences, but by the messages we receive in our schools, communities, and culture. And when students of color disengage or seem disconnected in the classroom, it's often because they do not see themselves represented, valued, or understood. In terms of lack of representation, only 8 to 9% of K through 12 students history circula nationwide focus on, only 8 to 9% of K through 12 history nationwide focuses on Black history or cultures. When students see themselves positively represented in curriculum, they are 35% more likely to be engaged in school and succeed academically. In a study of US textbooks, 87% of historical figures were highlighted were white men with limited focus on the contributions of Black people or other minorities. A lack of culturally relevant curriculum correlates with lower self-esteem in Black students, with 63% of surveyed students reporting that they felt their culture was not important in school. Over 20% of teachers feel confident in their ability to integrate culturally responsive teaching in their classrooms. Without proper training, the curriculum and teachers will unintentionally reinforce systemic racism, which further alienates Black students and affects their academic outcomes and even their life. So going into all this and looking at all these statistics and reading about the disparities that minorities face in just our education system alone, and how we perpetually reinforce systemic racism with lack of representation, uh, it was interesting because I didn't share any of these with my friend Angelica. I didn't share any of the statistics or anything like that. I let her know my topic, and I had some questions prepared, and her answers really reflected um, the statistics, and you'll kind of see. I'll get into it here in a second. Um, I'll give you a little bit on who Angelica is. Angelica Highsmith, she's my best friend's wife. She taught at a high school for a time, and she just transferred and got a new job. She's a high school drama department teacher at Oak Hills High School in Oak Hills, California. That's about 2 hours from here if there's traffic going to Vegas. Um, but she just got into this new position not that long ago, but she's been teaching for a few years. She is a really good friend of mine. She's Black, and she's one of the smartest people I know. So, my first question for her was, in your experience as a teacher, what are the biggest challenges you see students of color facing in schools today? So she put, as a teacher, I have noticed that male students of color tend to have the most documentation in their student portals regarding classroom expectations not being met or behavioral struggles. I find that these students tend to struggle with making connections and building relationships with their teachers and coaches because there may be a racial and gender barrier. There is a lack of male teachers of color in the education system, and those students don't have the representation in the classroom to feel comfortable building connections. The saying, students don't learn from people they do not like, is a great representation of the lack of connection male students tend to have with their teachers. Do you feel that arts programs like drama receive the same support and funding as other subjects in your school? Does this impact students, especially those from marginalized backgrounds? She said, luckily with Prop 28, the arts programs at my school were granted a large amount of money to support each individual program. With this money, I've been able to buy new props and have even looked into purchasing items that would widen the student experience and understanding of theater. For example, we are doing a unit based on stage and special effects makeup. The kids are very excited. This has a positive impact on students that don't have access to the resources at home and could direct them towards career paths they were unaware of. As a young Black woman teaching in the school system, do you feel there are additional challenges you face in your role? How do your experiences shape the way you support your students? I feel that there are challenges that I face daily. As the only woman and youngest person in the visual and performing arts department on my campus, I find that it can be difficult to be taken seriously in group settings. Yet I am often the one to take time to assist and problem solve for my colleagues in areas they are unfamiliar with, such as engaging academic websites or technical theater work. I have found that in the few months I've been in my position, I have taken the initiative more than others, but I'm still not thought of as a crucial part of the established team. The experience can sometimes be isolating. How do you think school inequalities, like lack of funding, resources, or representation, affect the opportunities and confidence of students of color? I definitely think that it is important for schools to receive funding in order for students to have access to tools and resources to better their understanding of their potential. If students are not given the opportunity to explore different skills, then they may feel trapped with the default options that they might not take interest in. I feel that representation for the students is important, again, to build the relationship with their teachers in order to encourage their learning. I've had many students reach out to let me know that they feel comfortable in my classroom because I treat them like human beings and I show that I care about them. Lastly, what steps do you think schools and teachers can take to make education more equitable and supportive for students of color? I think that schools should allow flexibility for students to prioritize their mental health as well as genuinely care about the struggles and obstacles that students are facing outside of school. If a student is coming into school after a rough night at home, chances are the student is not going to do well academically. The social emotional learning aspect of the education system needs to be more genuine. Right now, I feel like it is very performative. These students need to know that they are cared about. However, they also must be held to expectations that prepare them for professional settings. There are ways to do this while nurturing their well being. There are so many students that feel they are not being seen by their teachers. Yeah, so it was really interesting. Um, in my interview to see how much of her experience is reflected into the statistics and in the problems that many people report. Um, in terms of addressing everything or trying to make a plan as far as how to work on this issue, uh, I kind of thought the first step to solving any problem is admitting that there is one, right? So we have to begin on raising awareness because a lot of this, I wasn't even aware of that people felt this way. You know, um, we have to raise awareness, advocate for change, and figure out the steps to take direct action for it. As far as raising awareness, I think this starts with going into your own local community, um, organizing an event in our community or a workshop, or even just setting up at like a fair or at a like a swap meet or a market and just talking to people, um, or workshop at a school or a local center to educate students, parents, and teachers about the problem of school inequality, showing them the statistics, going over it, bringing up testimonies from teachers, like my friend Angelica, um, showing them the disparities in funding, the access to resources or representation, and highlighting the importance of art programs or advanced courses and extracurricular opportunities for students of color specifically. Like adding clubs to schools, um, educating the community just helps create urgency and builds support. Um, Partnering with organizations to work for educational equity, like Black Lives Matter, the NAACP, or local nonprofits, uh, and just working together to promote equitable funding and teacher diversity. One second, sorry. The third step would be to petition local school boards or district leaders, for advocating for changes in policy, demanding equitable funding, demanding more representation for employment in schools, speak out about the issue that affects students of color, contact local lawmakers. And then advocacy just pushes decision makers to prioritize equitable and prioritize equity for the schools. And then we could also support students through mentorship programs like making a club or partnering with local high schools or youth centers, to offer more representation, stuff like that. Also, social media is an amazing tool this day and age to reach a broad audience and to mobilize people to take action. It can amplify the voices of students, and teachers who are affected by the inequity. And then promoting culturally responsive teaching and curriculum. So work with teachers and administrators to advocate for incorporating Black history and literature into the state curriculum. Training teachers to be culturally responsive, teaching practices that affirm the identities of students of color, encouraging schools to hire and retain teachers of color so students can feel valued, understood, and be able to connect and engage with their teachers. Organize fundraisers if for books, technology, or school supplies or scholarships. Ultimately, this plan would combine awareness, advocacy, direct action, and community collaboration to address school inequality. And I think with all those things, we can definitely make a dent in it and start. It would educate others about systemic barriers, advocate for long-term solutions, and provide immediate support. Here's a list of all my resources. And then I gotta go with the man, Nelson. My man, the man, he puts the man in Mandela. His quote, education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. So that's my presentation. I really enjoyed this class, and I really enjoyed learning about this topic and connecting with Angelica and talking about it. And I'm looking forward to one day when I am a teacher, um, just making sure I care for the kids and making sure that they know that I care about them and I love them. And I want what's best for them, and trying to help everybody. So appreciate it. Thank you. Have a good rest of the semester. Oh, I have to go to Zoom to end the call. Okay.